I think the most interesting thing I can say about Tears of the Kingdom right now is that it necessitates play in a way that makes playing it just to finish it difficult. This is a fully baked game that begs you to play it with intentionality. I think some games have gotten so predictable in their pacing that I expected the worst of Tears of the Kingdom. That I would have to savor my experience so that it would ultimately be more fun. But I personally think playing it the way I really wanted to, a mad dash towards the final boss, regardless of anything else, would have made it easier to enjoy the journey that's packed alongside this game. Where Breath of the Wild's focus is simplicity, Tears of the Kingdom focuses on making your journey big and stretchy. I appreciated a lot of Breath of the Wild because it had these places that felt grand or important just by being there, the way nature kind of does on its own. I feel like the initial plus of having something like Tears of the Kingdom, which is supposedly all of that but bigger and better, is that I was supposed to have more moments that allowed me to appreciate that simplicity. But because of the size and its touted complexity in comparison, I feel like I actually have less to simply appreciate than the first time around. Tears of the Kingdom is an exercise in expectation control. I get my hopes up, then I remember how Breath of the Wild cut the fun short in some areas, where I expected more, and then look, they actually did it this time. That's both a good and bad thing, because not only do you see what wasn't present in Breath of the Wild that maybe could have been, you see all of the things that they spent that 6 years fine-tuning for this game. On an escapist video I was watching, they were talking about how the problem with AAA productions is that they're all focused on graphics, while they could be focusing on putting more game in the game, which is hard enough to do in this economy where teams just want products regardless of their quality. It's such an anomaly that when I picked up Spider-Man Miles Morales and the game started telling me how to play it instead of being crafted with that intuition in mind so as to let me figure out how to do it on my own, I got hit with a wave of Zelda withdrawal, and I'd have to shut off my PS5 for like a month in hopes that maybe Sony would get it right next time. These might seem like disconnected things. One aspect is dev power and the work that goes into just building a game that can handle whatever you throw at it. The other being pure design choice. But those are things that must go hand in hand, because the tools that you have at your disposal to build your game directly influence the way that it is allowed to be designed. That's why when I play a game like Miles Morales or God of War Ragnarok, I get hit with this feeling. Because Zelda let me have fun the way I wanted to, and I still got to beat the game. Why won't you guys let me do it the way I want to? On some level, it's a forced argument. Ragnarok is meant to be linear. On some level, so is Miles Morales. But especially with Spidey, it made me particularly concerned. This is where Tears of the Kingdom excels. It does not hold your hand. Whatever you had in Breath of the Wild in terms of space and approach to solving things, double it, then fuse a fire fruit to it, throw a Hylian pinecone at it, ride the wind, and throw a gust in another direction. Because Tears of the Kingdom is meaty. Now, all of that meat isn't really tasty if we're not marinating it, and believe you me, I spent a good deal of time at the start of this one just stumbling around, because I was overwhelmed with how dense this game was compared to what we were just working with. In the first week, I had to put Tears of the Kingdom down after every 30 or so minutes, not only because I was busy, but the sheer amount of things that they packed into this made it overwhelming to play. The way I'm saying this, at some point you might consider to wonder if they're hitting this with the quantity over quality approach. To that, I would tell you, kinda. This game is polished. So polished that they spent a full year of development doing just that. What this means for me is that there are neat little additions like Weapon Fusion and Ascension that take some of the best parts of last game, like varied weapons and champion powers, Rivali's Gale in this case, and improvise on them. In terms of the basics of gameplay, the physics feel tighter, the enemies fight smarter, and nearly every spot is the beginning of a new quest or discovery. Now, I bought Elden Ring waiting for this game, and the most memorable part of the 180 hours I spent and 2 major bosses I killed was the exploration. Quite honestly, in comparison, the biggest draw Tears has for me is its presentation. In terms of looks, Tears takes Breath of the Wild and then uses that as the ball for which to knock it out of the park. The sunsets, the way the lighting works, the greens, and the vibrance of a life that has done its absolute darndest to thrive after the calamity. These are all firing on all cylinders. The way that you find flowers and water in spaces that were previously full of dry land and debris, and how this time there's actual people around now, is crazy. Towns have been rebuilt, and everything still fits this game's moody, cel-shaded atmosphere that leans towards its Ghibli anime influences but maintains its own firm identity. All of this blends into the music, which is a smidge more vibrant than last time, where there were delicate, spaced out but purposeful piano keys representative of a slow but sure determination in Breath of the Wild. Now we have full scales, melodies, and arpeggios that come up and go as we spend our time in Tears of the Kingdom. Yes, we are having a similar experience, but there is an added weight to it all. Unfortunately, when it comes to the presentation, there is also a downside here. It seems that when it comes to having small moments that are impactful and memorable, while also having huge spectacle moments that wow you, this game tried to one-up everything in Breath of the Wild. I feel like it nailed the latter. The Colgera theme is insane, and the entirety of the finale is awesome. I just wish I felt that same energy for the rest of the game, where instead it tries building up to a lot of it to mixed effectiveness. I spent a lot of time looking forward to the song from the third trailer, assuming I would at least hear it in the finale. You never get to hear that song in this game, and that's kind of representative of my mixed feelings about parts of the game in general. Yes, there are new sounds and melodies, but any town you visited in the last game feels and sounds the exact same as now. That is a giant bummer. Tears of the Kingdom's philosophy seems to be a lot of improv style yes and isms, and I'm largely okay with that because of how much I liked the first one, but I was expecting remixes, additions, and altogether a bit more that affirms this game's identity separately from the first one, because so much is similar that I do start to wonder why this wasn't released as a DLC in the first place. The answer is that enough is different in terms of quality of life that it creates a different experience of things, even if it's the same spaces. But what's lost in some of that is that awe-inspiring feeling of intentionality that felt plentiful in Breath of the Wild. A lot of this can be blamed on my playstyle, but I feel as if that point is moot because the gameplay loop in Tears encourages this effect. Now let's tackle gameplay. I think Tears of the Kingdom plays great, but a bunch of my high points come with huge caveats. Exploration, traversal, and questing are all things that have been ramped up. There is more to see in every single aspect of this game. Each nook and cranny has more. There are more new types of items, more rocks and gems, more openings in the land to explore further within. Usually, wherever you go, it leads to something else, and it's almost always a delight. Here's the caveat, it runs the risk of getting samey. After 150-ish hours of playing and finishing the 4 main temples, I've gotten pretty used to most of what I'm going to encounter in this game. I'll make an addendum here if I feel differently by the time I'm editing. I do not. The thing is, as someone who got annoyed and bored with Elden Ring pretty quickly, from the leveling system to the combat that left me wanting a same or similar game, but more to Bloodborne or Sekiro's pace, the exploration was always intriguing. Again, I clocked somewhere around 180 hours on my PS4 copy, and even then I not only felt but knew that I hadn't come close to seeing all the things that Elden had to offer. It was just a matter of risk and reward not always feeling appropriately matched in that one. In Tears of the Kingdom, the risk tends to be matched pretty aptly with reward. Exploration nets you gems, clothes, or item and weapon upgrades for later. These are all things that you will be using, but on the other side, I expected Tears of the Kingdom to be cognizant of its competitors in the way that Breath of the Wild was with its, and beat them at that. One of the most memorable things for me about Elden Ring was that I'd be running around and suddenly find myself lost in an abandoned city full of its own secrets. They have some of that in Tears of the Kingdom's caves, but I still felt like I got more of a creative sense of exploration out of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle. I feel like I couldn't have gotten so tired of certain aspects in Tears of the Kingdom if the traversal felt better. In Elden Ring you have Torrent, in Ghost of Tsushima you have your horse, which you can call most of the time too. Heck, in Breath of the Wild you can get the Master Cycle 0 if you try hard enough. In Tears you have like the machines you can make on Ultrahand if you're good at Ultrahand and you like spending time on that. Eventually you get auto build, and if you're by any horse stables, you can call on your horse then. But I still don't like having to put in all of this effort just to move around a bit faster, and it irks me, because they've basically perfected vertical movement in Tears. It's a shame that horizontal movement doesn't feel up to par. I was most excited at this game potentially bringing back classic Zelda items like the hookshot, because it seemed like such a natural answer to upping the ante of the slower pacing that the paraglider offers. Granted, with things like Tulin's wind powers, it's kind of an alternative to that, but more of an approximation at that. I would have imagined that if it was conceived of within this game, the hookshot would have had more practical applications. I'm not faulting the dev team here for not including something that was never planned for in this game, but that is a note about how there already were pre-existing solutions to things that do get more tedious as this game goes on. Now, with everything being ramped up a couple notches and there simply being more to do at all times of this game, I found a particular point of contention. I liked the simplicity of Breath of the Wild. For better and worse, Tears of the Kingdom is so much more complex. Any given situation in this game has answers that make me think more than I ever did while playing Breath of the Wild, and I know that because Breath of the Wild was my podcast game, but Tears of the Kingdom can't be that for me. Towers aren't just climbing and fights anymore. No, those are now little puzzles that often have their fixes a walk away, like attaching an object to a pulley to make an elevator, finding the right food to motivate the guy to fix the darn thing. The food is a lie, you just need to enter the cave and ascend, or even finding your way in to open the doors of a tower by using rewind to throw yourself up in ways that only Link can make happen. I think this emphasizes something I actually disliked quite a bit. As you start Tears of the Kingdom, it feels pretty open-ended, but in reality, most things in Tears felt like they had a specific solution. I feel like because of how simple Breath of the Wild was in comparison to this game, it allowed for things to always have an open-ended feeling to how you went about doing them, but because they brought back more specific puzzles, in both the shrines that just have them and generally in the philosophy of this game's design, you have to use certain powers and utilities in ways that you never had to in the last one. In Breath of the Wild, if I threw enough remote bombs at something in a shrine, eventually I could clinch beating it by a combination of stupidity and luck. But here, most of the time the answer is Ultrahand, which brings me to my next point. I don't love Ultrahand. In terms of practical application, Ultrahand is a utility that allows for crazy amounts of freedom and creativity within this game, but as it is useful, it also feels like it's the solution to most things here. In Breath of the Wild, I hated Magnesis, but luckily, there were plenty of shrines where it wasn't actually needed. On one hand, I understand that this criticism can be rendered invalid in a couple areas, mainly that the implementation of core mechanics of the game throughout its entirety in such a broad and creative manner is a feat in and of itself. Overall, because of how expansively the ability can be used, makes this game just that much more impressive. On the other hand, it disappoints me quite a bit. Not only do I just not enjoy how Ultrahand feels because of the natural bodily disconnect from Link that makes for maneuvering at times feeling awkward, it can lead to Link feeling a little more useless in general at times, like he simply can't get through the mines or complete any of the temples on his own. Now, putting the contraptions together is fine, but I also like being able to do it pretty quickly, and the downtime of gluing everything in Ultrahand with perfect positioning and then having to move the item so that it doesn't fall and everything feels okay, kills some of my excitement before I even get to see the result of all of that work. Unfortunately, I think the point I'm trying to make here is that because it's such a necessity for so many things within this game, Ultrahand ends up feeling more like a chore than an added layer of freedom. It's for this reason that I'm thankful auto-build exists. but it doesn't fix every problem I have here. It at least knocks out the vehicle problem, shaving it down to a one-time situation where if you do it right this time, you get to just use the cool thing you made however often you want. At least as long as you have enough zonite, materials, and charges. This is not always the case though. A lot of zonite equipment is relegated to being found by chance, through dispensers, or just what you run into. Zonite utilities are initially harder to find on the surface and depths, to the point that when I'm completing tasks in the depths, I often opt to just do it entirely without zonite machinery, unless it's a minecart. It can just get complicated in ways that I'd rather ascend and fly over. Again, this is an instance where the application of something like a hookshot would have been a gift, because it would allow for a different level of maneuverability and reactive adjustment to situations than the kind of one-note nature that a lot of the zonai contraptions, or at least the ones that I put together, had. What I wanted was a simple answer to something, and this game made plenty of mini-games out of that solution, which might be exciting to someone, and I'm happy for that person, but it was tedious to me. So the temples are weird, man. On one level, I appreciate this insane layer of detail and complexity where you solve all of these puzzles and get into these situations that feel like they are the entire temple in and of itself. But then you realize that that was actually all of the stuff just to open up the temple, and that this is where all of the fun actually begins. On the other hand, those puzzles to get to the start of the temple can be hit or miss. I loved the opening of the Wind Temple, where you just keep on going higher and higher up until you realize that, hey, this is the Wind Temple, and isn't it crazy that they were able to fit all of this game into the game? Then you get to ones like the Water Temple, and it's basically 3 fetch quests in a trench coat, holding you at gunpoint, making you do all of this labor just to see Sidon. Maybe spacing out these temples was a good thing, because it keeps the game from feeling boring in areas, but I also would have been interested to see what it'd be like if I really was just allowed to walk up to a location and start the temple. I feel like that would have encouraged the philosophy of freedom that I feel defines the Breath of the Wild series of Zelda games. I often found temple bosses disappointing. Again, the Colgero was really cool, but in order to make it last long enough to even hear the battle music to its end, you have to go to the depths just to make it a bit more difficult, or you have to pause the game so that you can just listen to the music in the background. The final boss was way better than anything else, and I went into this game expecting that energy from the rest of the bosses. That would have been memorable. My favorite part of Breath of the Wild was Hyrule Castle, and getting to it in this game felt weird. It was a fun fight in the Sanctum, but beyond that, the sense of wonder and exploration that made it fun in the first game just feels kind of erased because of the assumption that the depths are naturally more interesting. It was fun going through the castle the first time in Tears, and it sent me on my way towards getting the Master Sword. And at this point, everything felt kind of like a weird post-game, because I expected so much more. I barely touched the Yiga clan questline, and I didn't really spend a lot of time dawdling on broad side quests. I branched out to do fairy fountains, but that was basically it. I actually found a couple of the side quests I did try to complete frustrating, wanting some of the simpler things to be more straightforward, like unlocking farming. So, this game's entire philosophy is caves. It's easy to get sidetracked in this game. There's so much to do at any given moment, considering the revamped first map that's sandwiched between the 1.5 new ones. I initially believed that they would function as disjointed add-ons. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing, it would just feel disconnected, not really relevant to one another, as that's how they feel when they're first introduced. And sure, the Sky Islands are cool, but at least in my case, you barely interact with them at all during the first half of the game, and they won't start to matter until it's around time to pick up the Master Sword. Sure, you make plenty of use of the sky during the Wind Temple, but that feels like the exception to the rule. Similarly, the Fire Temple makes use of the depths in what initially feels like a one-and-done moment, but those depths are kinda something else. I don't even remember how much I knew going into the game during release anymore, but I did try to limit the amount of information I had, so when I stumbled into the depths for the first time, I was overwhelmed. I discovered the depths by going around Hyrule Castle to see if I could scavenge late-game weapons, and I was greeted with the inability to access it the way I believed I'd be able to. I tried to get past enemies, I skipped, hopped, and jumped, and then I got smacked. I realized I didn't have enough stamina to get me out of the area, but I still wanted to explore, so I fell. And then I got further and further below until there was so much gloom-covered rock and scarily overpowered mobs that I got out of there as fast as possible. So when I entered again, like a long time after, it was a shock. I'd gotten bored of the surface again because I was pretty underpowered, and I was trying to reactivate the Temple of Time to upgrade my stamina. So I go there, which puts me on a quest, which has me hopping around to different sections of the surface, dropping those eyes down to the depths, and then I had to redo it all because I assumed that all of the eyes would stay put on the depths floor after I dropped each one down. And so I finally go and drop down with the stone eye I tossed, and there's that fast-paced glittery look, then there's that blaring trumpet sound signaling that you really did enter the depths, and then there's darkness. I didn't initially realize the purpose of the bright bloom seed, so I tiptoed across dark cave floor, ran across gloom, and then discovered an abandoned mineshaft. That brought me along further to the main area with a bargainer statue, putting all of its eyes back into it, and then finding my first light room. I don't mean to create the biggest run-on paragraph I've ever written to date, but like a run-on sentence or paragraph, such is the design philosophy of Tears of the Kingdom. I remember Breath of the Wild as a very point A to point B game in hindsight, which is probably why I replay it more, where yes, climbing and planning were built into it all, but that was so foundational. In order to finish a basic quest in Tears, you are strung along this litany of different start and end points to like 5 or 6 other aspects of this game, quests or otherwise, at any given moment. By nature of how good an example it is to play this game, bringing life back to the Temple of Time ruins and the Bargainer statue in the depths is such a great tutorial on how to use the depths, in the way that it feels so natural, in a way that makes the Great Plateau feel stilted. Of course, that comes with its own caveats. I thought that I'd lost the Bargainer statue eyes until I googled and realized that they all reset when I left them on the depths floor, without putting them where they needed to be. I googled that because I was frustrated and confused about how to get further. There's enough room for error here that leads to potential discouragement. But honestly, that might just have been a me problem. There's plenty of people doing tons of things in this game that I haven't even glossed over the first step to. Endgame spoilers. Even getting to the final boss is like exploring a cave. Not only is that literally how you get to Ganondorf in the first place, but here's how the fight went for me. I don't like shrines, so I didn't do a lot. I did about 8 total, maybe more, but just enough to add a second stamina wheel. Because of that, I only have heart containers from bosses. Long story short, mine flew by pretty quickly. Fighting Ganondorf means dealing with gloom, and in order to do that with the gear I had, I needed meals to restore broken hearts, which meant Sundelions. In order to get more Sundelions, I'd need to go to the Sky Islands, grab as many as possible, cook them into meals, then head back down into the end area, which I can only tackle if I'm really ready, because it's a gauntlet that wears you down by a good slew of resources if you're not staying on your toes. Only then could I get back and finally slap Ganondorf around a little bit. I could go on, but this in summation is what Tears of the Kingdom's gameplay loop is. It's a constant conversation. I started with my video capture of this game assuming that I'd just play through, and when I found sections that felt interesting or worth sharing or showing on screen, I'd flip the Elgato on and flash quick cuts and shots of whatever I got. It's because of this game that I've risked maxing out the 200 gigs of space that I set aside for capturing footage multiple times. As much as I make a big stink about having so many things to do to get a single thing done in Tears of the Kingdom, I ultimately feel like it ends up being quality content if you have time for it once you're used to the gameplay loop. The Hateno Village School is a fun side quest, albeit somewhat confusing to me when it came to the specifics of actually finishing it. Similarly, in that if I really wanted to, I could have just gone straight to Ganon like last time. I feel I would have enjoyed my time with this one with the knowledge that I could literally pick which way I wanted to play the game. The game itself seems to be incredibly insistent that you do and enjoy everything it has to offer, but knowing how much of it really is optional maybe would have set me at ease. That's where my criticism can actually become a compliment. You see, it's not just that there is so much of the game to Tears of the Kingdom, that's not what makes it special. In my experience with Tears, there is so much of this game that is of genuine quality that this is an absolute feast. This is why ultimately I think I'm going to end up deleting my save file and just playing it again the way I want to. But, and here's where my biggest complaints come. Listen, I'm not someone who's hell-bent on finishing every game I play. I play until I feel I've gotten the experience I wanted or I've gotten tired of the game. I've clocked somewhere around 300 hours on Enter the Gungeon, but I've only played the first 3 hours of Control. I played Returnal and got up to the first boss. I think Tears of the Kingdom is a great video game, and its set-piece moments in gameplay combined with its cutscenes have left me the most wowed I've been in a while with a game. As expected. I bring up all of my bona fides to articulate the fact that I rarely try to judge a game solely based on its replayability. But something here is missing. I played Tears of the Kingdom, barely scratched the surface of what it actually has to offer, and I feel like I've seen everything there is to see with this game. I try to pick it up, and 10 minutes later I'm playing Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on 100cc. When I pick up Breath of the Wild again, I like to get lost. There's magic here. The Guardians, just the ruins of places, Hyrule Castle, it all builds up to something I haven't even been able to properly summarize. That's not to say there are no issues with Breath of the Wild, there absolutely are, but it's one of the most memorable experiences I've had in a minute, and a lot of that is entirely because of the way that I feel like I can just put the game on after a long time and just do something, go somewhere. Finish the one challenge I keep getting stuck on. I haven't beat the DLC quests, and I feel like I might actually put effort into doing that once I beat Ganon again, because I deleted my save file. But when I play Tears of the Kingdom after beating the final boss, it feels kind of pointless. Maybe it's because I never had Breath of the Wild without the DLC, but I feel like Tears of the Kingdom is the first time I've actively expected a video game's DLC. That same magic just isn't really here this time, and it's a shame, because this game is a really good one. It just doesn't feel as grand as the first one left me feeling the second could. Going into this game, I never expected to leave it on an entirely mixed note, but here we are. I originally was going to leave it on the note that so much of this game was of pure quality. But at the risk of sounding spoiled with what I've gotten to have here, I don't think it really all is. I like the idea of throwing so much more at the template that Breath of the Wild creates, but during so much of my playthrough, I couldn't help fight off the feeling that I probably would have enjoyed this game more if it was a bit more deliberately linear, reeled in, since so much of it feels linear regardless. How's this? Tears of the Kingdom is a constant conversation. With that, it has its highs and lows. And it doesn't necessarily have a definitive good or bad about it. It's ambitious, for better and worse. Maybe I'll be able to figure out what's missing after I play some more Breath of the Wild. Thanks for watching.